I knew something was off the second I saw that stupid little sign floating down the creek. Yeah, my creek, bobbing along like it had just given up on life. Private property, printed in bold black letters. Laminate peeling at the corners like it had been ripped out of the ground in a hurry. And right then I just stood there on the bank, coffee still warm in my hand, thinking, no way they did it again. See, I didn't buy this place for drama. I bought it for quiet. Tucked at the edge of a wooded bend just outside a neighborhood that technically had an HOA, but not me. I made damn sure of that when I signed the papers. The realtor even joked about it, said, "You're close enough to enjoy the landscaping, far enough to avoid the politics." And I thought, yeah, perfect, until I met Linda Carver. Linda was the HOA president, mid-50s, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be, oversized sunglasses, clipboard glued to her hand like it was a weapon. And that smile. You know, the kind sweet on the surface, but it always felt like she was grating you while she talked. First month I moved in, she tried to tell me my shed paint was non-compliant with community tones. I didn't even live in the community. 2 weeks later, she left a notice about my mailbox height, which, by the way, matched 3 other houses on the same road. But somehow mine offended her personally. So yeah, when I saw that sign in the water, I already knew whose fingerprints were on it. I walked down toward the bend, boots crunching over the gravel, and that's when I heard it. Soft music, like jazz or something, drifting through the trees, and I'm thinking, who the hell brings a soundtrack to a creek? I stepped past the brush, and there they are. Linda and her 2 loyal sidekicks, Carol and Denise, sitting in folding chairs like they're at some lakeside resort. Fishing lines cast into the water, cooler between them, Bluetooth speaker playing like they're on vacation on my land. I just stood there for a second, letting it sink in. Then I cleared my throat. Loud. Linda turns slow, real slow, like she's been expecting me. Gives me that smile. "Oh, hey there, Mark. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" I didn't smile back. "You're on private property." Carol actually laughed, like a full-on snort. "Oh, come on. It's just a creek." I reached into my jacket, pulled out a laminated copy of my deed. Yeah, I keep one handy. Learned that the hard way. Held it up. Not just a creek. Mine. From the bridge down to the oak line. Linda didn't even blink. She just waved her hand like I was being dramatic. "We voted on this last month. Community access to natural water features. It's for everyone's enjoyment." I stared at her, just stared. "You voted to give away something you don't own?" She shrugged. "We're not hurting anything, Mark. And honestly, you're not even using it every day." That part stuck. "Get off my property." Denise rolled her eyes. Carol muttered something under her breath. But Linda just leaned back in her chair like she had all the time in the world. "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I didn't argue, didn't yell, just turned around and walked back up the bank. Because see, here's the thing, I had cameras. And the second she said they'd been coming here, I knew this wasn't new. By the time I got back to the house, I was already pulling up the feed, 4 cameras, all wired into a private system I installed myself. No cloud, no outside access, just raw footage stored locally. I hadn't checked the creek cam in weeks, not since some raccoon decided my tackle box was a buffet. But this time I had a reason. The footage loaded slow, and when it did, I felt my stomach drop. They weren't just fishing. 3 weeks back, 9:12 a.m., Linda shows up with 2 guys from the HOA board, both wearing those committee member polos like that meant something, and they're holding a chainsaw. My chainsaw, actually, I recognized the orange handle. They walked straight to the dogwood tree by the bank, my tree, and they cut it down. No hesitation, no permission, nothing. Next clip, 2 days later, bags of gravel dumped along the slope, spreading it out like they're building a walkway. Then another visit, rope swing tied to the low branch of a sycamore. And the worst one, kids. 6 of them, maybe more, splashing around in the creek while the adults sit back drinking like it's a weekend picnic. I leaned back in my chair, just staring at the screen. This wasn't just trespassing. This was them claiming it. And that's when something shifted, not anger exactly, something colder, more focused. I printed every frame, timestamps and all, locked the originals away, and made 2 calls. One to a friend of mine, Rachel Bennett, real estate attorney, sharp as hell, and not the kind of person you want on the other side of a case. And the second call, sheriff's office. Because if they wanted to treat my land like a public park, I was about to remind them exactly where the line was. All right, quick pause here, because what Linda did, that wasn't just annoying neighbor behavior. That crossed into something a lot more serious. And if you've never dealt with an HOA before, this is where people usually get confused. According to standard procedure, an HOA only has authority over properties that are legally within its jurisdiction, meaning, if your parcel isn't listed in their governing documents, they don't get to fine you, regulate you, or vote on what happens to your land, no matter how confident they sound holding a clipboard. And yeah, a lot of them act like they run the whole neighborhood, but legally, their power is actually pretty limited. From a legal perspective, what Linda and her crew did checks multiple boxes: trespassing, property damage, and something called unauthorized land alteration. Cutting down a tree alone can trigger serious penalties depending on the state, especially if it's mature growth. And once you start adding gravel paths, structures, or inviting people, especially minors, onto land you don't own, now you're stacking liability like pancakes. One accident out there, that becomes a lawsuit nightmare. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just about law, it's about behavior. This is a psychological trap, and HOAs fall into it all the time. It's what happens when a small group of people are given just enough authority to feel powerful, but not enough oversight to keep them grounded. Over time, they stop seeing boundaries as fixed and start seeing them as suggestions. They normalize small oversteps, a warning here, a suggestion there, and eventually, they convince themselves they're entitled to enforce rules even where they don't apply. And Linda? She wasn't just being careless, she was testing limits. The moment she said, "You're not even using it every day," that told me everything. In her mind, ownership wasn't about rights, it was about usage, about control. If you're not actively defending something, someone like her will slowly convince themselves it's up for grabs. The lesson here is, property boundaries aren't just lines on paper. They're lines people will push, especially when they think no one's watching. And the longer you let it slide, the harder it becomes to take it back. Now me? I had footage, I had documentation, and more importantly, I had patience. And what came next? Yeah, that's where things started to fall apart for them. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because what just happened back there, that wasn't just some petty neighborhood drama. That was a full-on case study in how HOAs go off the rails if nobody checks them. According to standard procedure, an HOA only has power over properties that are legally bound to it, meaning your parcel has to be explicitly included in their recorded covenants, conditions, and restrictions. If it's not in there, they can't fine you, they can't regulate you, and they sure as hell can't vote to open your private land to the public like it's a community pool. That's not governance, that's overreach. From a legal perspective, what Linda and her little weekend fishing club did is actually a stack of violations, not just one. Trespassing is the obvious one, sure, but cutting down a tree? That's property damage. Spreading gravel, installing a swing? That's unauthorized land alteration. And inviting people, especially kids, onto land they don't own? That opens up liability exposure that could get very expensive very fast if something goes wrong. But honestly, the legal side is only half the story. This is a psychological trap, and it shows up in HOA boards more than people realize. When a small group gets used to enforcing rules, even legitimate ones, they start to internalize that authority as identity. It stops being "we follow guidelines" and becomes "we decide what's right." And once that shift happens, boundaries blur. Linda didn't wake up one day thinking, "I'm going to break the law." No, she got there step by step. First it's mailbox notices, then paint colors, then suggestions. Then suddenly, she's sitting in a folding chair on land she doesn't own, convinced she has every right to be there. And that line she dropped, "You're not even using it every day," that's the tell. Because to someone like her, unused space feels like wasted control. If you're not actively asserting ownership, she reads that as an opening, a gap she can step into and redefine. The lesson here is, people don't just respect boundaries because they exist, they respect them because they're enforced. And the moment enforcement disappears, even for a little while, someone else will rewrite the rules in their favor. And me? I had just realized something important. This wasn't going to stop on its own. By mid-afternoon, Deputy Collins was standing in my backyard, arms crossed, watching the footage on my tablet. Didn't say much at first, just let the clips play. Chainsaw, gravel, ropes swing, kids in the water. And then he let out this slow breath like he'd seen this kind of thing before, just not this blatant. Yeah, he said finally, scratching his jaw. This isn't good for them. That's one way to put it, I replied. He nodded, still looking at the screen. They altered your land, removed a tree, created a recreational setup, and invited people onto it without your consent. That's multiple violations right there. I looked at him. Can you cite them? He gave me a look, not annoyed, just matter of fact. We're past citations. You want to press charges? No hesitation. Yeah. And that was the moment things shifted from neighborhood annoyance to something real. He filed it under criminal trespass and property damage right there on site. Said I'd have a case number by morning. I walked him out, watched his cruiser roll down the road, and for a second, I just stood there in the driveway, quiet, letting it all settle. Because I'd expected pushback, sure, maybe a warning, maybe an argument, but this was going to land harder than they thought. Rachel called me that night. Didn't waste time with small talk. I reviewed your deed, she said, and it's airtight. Your boundary extends beyond the creek's northern bank. The tree they cut was well inside your property line, and anything they built down there, even gravel, qualifies as structural alteration. So we've got a case. We've got two, she corrected. Criminal and civil. And there's something else. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What? I pulled the HOA filings from the county clerk, she said. Your parcel isn't in their jurisdiction. I blinked. Wait, what? You're adjacent to their zone, but not part of it. Legally, they have zero authority over you, which means every notice, every warning, every attempt to regulate your property is invalid. More than that, she said, it could be considered fraudulent. I actually laughed, first time all day, not because it was funny, but because suddenly everything made sense. All those notes, all those violations, they weren't just annoying. They were baseless. Next morning, I was at the courthouse filing formal complaints, trespass, vandalism, unlawful use of private property, while Rachel drafted the civil suit. By noon, paperwork was moving. By afternoon, I was back down at the creek taking photos. The stump, the gravel, the swing still swaying like it didn't realize it was evidence now. 2 days later, everything blew up. The citations hit first. All 5 of them, Linda, Carol, Denise, and the 2 committee guys, served personally. Word spread fast. Real fast. I was unloading groceries when my neighbor, Pete, walked over shaking his head like he'd just watched a car crash. You really did it, he said. Yeah. Heard Linda tried arguing with the deputy like he was a barista who got her order wrong. That sounds about right. He chuckled. About time someone pushed back. And that's when the shift started, not just with me, but with the whole neighborhood. People started coming by. Quiet at first, a couple, then a few more. Stories started spilling out, fines that didn't make sense, warnings that contradicted city code, pressure tactics. One woman said they threatened her over how she parked in her own driveway. Another guy had been cited for a fence that predated the HOA entirely. So I started a folder. Called it Overreach. Every story, every document, every complaint, organized. Because suddenly, this wasn't just my fight anymore. By the weekend, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the community center. I didn't go, didn't need to, but Rachel did, representing me. She walked in with packets, thick ones. Inside, everything. Footage stills, legal filings, proof that my property wasn't even under their authority, and a formal notice warning them that any further action toward me would be considered harassment. She told me later, Linda didn't take it well. Apparently, she went pale, like the color drained out of her all at once. And for the first time, she didn't have a response ready. And then, the dominoes started falling. By Monday, one of the board members resigned. By Tuesday, another tried to distance herself from the whole thing, claiming she wasn't fully aware of the creek situation. The rope swing disappeared overnight, just gone, like it had never been there. Didn't matter. The sheriff's office followed up with formal charges, trespassing, property damage, endangerment. Fines alone stacked up past 15 grand. And the best part? They couldn't use HOA funds to pay them. Personal liability. Every dollar out of their own pockets. But it didn't stop there. Because once the county got involved, they started looking closer. An inspector showed up, walked the perimeter, checked boundary markers, and then he pointed something out I hadn't even noticed, survey flags. You're clean, he said. But their community garden? He shook his head. encroaching onto county land. That triggered a whole new chain reaction. Code enforcement, environmental review. Turns out the gravel they dumped near the creek disrupted a protected runoff channel. State-level violation. I didn't even file that one. Someone else did. Word had spread, and people were done staying quiet. Then came the real hit. Financial records. Once the state started digging, they found reimbursements, equipment that didn't exist, payments routed through a landscaping company tied to one of the board members. $8,000, maybe more. 2 weeks later, Linda was arrested. No sirens, just quiet, early morning. Walked out in front of her house, while neighbors watched from behind curtains. One of the committee guys charged alongside her. The others tried to claim ignorance, but email records said otherwise. And me? I finalized the civil case. We didn't just go after the tree or the trespassing. We went after everything. Restoration costs, legal fees, damages, the whole thing. Judge fast-tracked it. Public interest. We won. Full payout. And during that final hearing, Rachel submitted one last motion, signed by over 40 residents, requesting removal of the entire HOA board under their own charter rules. It passed. Unanimous. New board took over within a month. Regular people this time, not power-hungry amateurs. First thing they did? Freeze all fines. Review every policy. And just like that, the tension that had been sitting over this place for years started to lift. I went back down to the creek a few days later. New sapling planted where the dogwood used to be. Gravel gone. Water flowing clean again. No chairs. No music. No trespassing. Just quiet. The kind of quiet I thought I was buying in the first place. And for the first time since all of this started, it actually felt like mine again. So, here's the part people don't really talk about when stories like this end. Yeah, I won. Legally, financially, all of that. The creek's mine, the HOA got gutted, people faced consequences on paper, it's a clean ending. But real life doesn't wrap itself up that neatly. Because what actually stuck with me wasn't the court win, it was how close this whole thing came to just becoming normal. Think about it. If I hadn't checked those cameras, if I'd shrugged it off one more time, if I'd told myself it's not worth the trouble, there's a very real chance that creek would have slowly turned into shared space. Not legally, but socially. People would have gotten used to it. Kids playing, chairs set up, maybe even a sign or two. And suddenly, the idea that it was private property? That would have felt unreasonable. And that's how it happens. Not overnight, but inch by inch. The lesson here is, boundaries don't disappear because they're challenged, they disappear because they're ignored. And that doesn't just apply to property. It applies to anything where authority and perception overlap. HOAs, workplaces, even friend groups. Once someone decides they can push a line, they'll keep pushing it until something, or someone, pushes back harder. From a legal perspective, I got lucky in one way. I had documentation, clear deed language, camera footage, and access to someone who knew how to navigate the system. A lot of people don't, and that's why situations like this drag on for years, or worse. People just give up and comply because it feels easier than fighting. But here's the uncomfortable truth. According to standard procedure, systems like HOAs are only as fair as the people running them. And when those people stop being accountable, the system doesn't correct itself automatically. It relies on pressure, legal, social, sometimes public, to recalibrate. Without that, it drifts. And what happened with Linda? That wasn't some rare, one-off situation. It's a pattern. Small authority, low oversight, growing confidence, until someone crosses a line they can't uncross. This is a psychological trap, not just for the people in power, but for everyone around them. Because the longer something feels normal, the harder it becomes to question it. People second-guess themselves. Maybe it's allowed. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it's not worth it. And that hesitation? That's exactly what allows overreach to expand. What broke that cycle here wasn't just me filing a complaint, it was visibility. Once the footage came out, once neighbors started comparing notes, once people realized they weren't the only ones dealing with it, everything shifted. Silence turned into conversation. Conversation turned into action. And that's the part one keep thinking about. Because I didn't fix the neighborhood. The neighborhood fixed itself, it just needed someone to go first. So if there's anything to take from this, it's this. Pay attention to the small things. The notices that don't quite make sense. The rules that seem to change depending on who they're applied to. The feeling, that gut feeling, that something's off, but nobody's saying it out loud. That's usually where it starts. And if you ever find yourself in that position, where someone's treating your space, your rights, your boundaries like they're optional, don't wait for it to get obvious. Because by the time it's obvious, it's already grown roots. Address it early. Document everything. Know what actually applies to you, not what someone tells you applies. And yeah, it might feel uncomfortable. You might feel like you're overreacting. You're probably not. Because the difference between a quiet neighborhood and one where someone thinks they can take what isn't theirs is usually just one person deciding. Not this time. Now I'm curious, have any of you dealt with something like this? HOA drama, overreach, weird rules that didn't sit right? Drop it in the comments. I read more of those than you'd think. And trust me, some of those stories get wild.